We're live with someone who recorded one podcast per day in 2022. That's pretty prolific. Jordan, welcome.
Thanks, man. Good to be here.
This is Preshow.
Good to be here.
We talked earlier about me bringing you in. I'm going to bring you in with a big intro, but that's going to be the show. We're going to do some pre-show here just to chit-chat a little bit. And you were telling me just before we went live that you did 350 plus shows last year.
I did 388 in 2021, and then I did 360 last year. So I don't know how. I got to go back and look at how 28 of them didn't happen.
2 years in a row.
Yeah, 2 years in a row. And then I have to go back and look. 2020 it was a lot too, but that was kind of before I was doing the Patreon thing, and then I jumped over to doing it on my own site, so I can actually track how many it is better than it was on Patreon. So I know it was 388 and then 360. So I think
what's
it was
your
some
website?
Stuff
Give us your website.
Analytics@dynasty.com. You
Perfect.
can go ahead and find it all over there. And I have my team building guide as well. That's up there at analytics@dynasty.com. It's like my yearly Dynasty strategy guide. This is like a comprehensive version of it this year, giving you some insight into basically team building from top to bottom on just some advanced Dynasty strategies. So yeah, and then I do the podcasts for subscribers over there every day. Dynasty Trade Database, tiers, the whole nine.
We should talk about team building in that case.
Well, it's funny because the show sheet you sent me, and I was looking at it last night, and I did some research on it, and it was funny because you were like, give me some day 3 wide receivers, and I was like, oh boy, I was like, I don't believe in them.
Yeah, you're not. Yeah, you're a lean veteran guy.
Yeah, and I haven't studied. I have a philosophical opposition to studying rookies in February. So I did sit down in the last like 24 hours and studied enough stuff to sound semi-intelligent on the matter. But
I only asked you a couple rookie questions.
Yeah. So, but it was like that's how like little I've leaned into rookies already. So, but yeah, I mean that becomes more of like a March through like April. Like it's like a rookie season to me is like a 6-week sprint, because one of the things I see people do is like, they'll do it from Christmas time through the end of April, and you start counting that up, and you spend a third of your year basically studying 20 guys. And I think that can sort of warp our reality a little bit. So that's one of the things that I caught myself doing that. I drafted Kyaris Garrett at 207 in his rookie draft season because I spent the entire offseason like sort of totally, in my mind in a swivel. And then I found myself sort of making that mistake. So I've learned from that. Right. And then he went undrafted and never had an NFL stat. And I burned just a second round rookie. I think it was 205.
Did he get a stat with Carolina?
I don't think he ever got a stat. I looked it up, and I believe he never. I think he was a.
He didn't catch a pass with Carolina? Kyaris Garrett?
Yep.
Where'd he go? East Oklahoma State?
He went to Tulsa.
Okay.
To Tulsa. And then he was like, he had some good breakout metrics, and then I believe he never had a stat in the NFL.
He's also had size.
Yeah, 6'3", 220. Wow. Ran 4.53 and never recorded an NFL stat.
How is that possible?
It's a good question. That's what I was thinking.
How bad are his hands? How bad is his work ethic? If he had hands and a work ethic, he would have absolutely caught some NFL passes.
128 broad, 36.5-inch vert at 6'3", 220. Never had an NFL stat.
There is something to be said for withholding your rookie analysis to prevent yourself from getting too indoctrinated into the rookie hype machine.
Yeah, that's it. And honestly, like I think I kind of wrote in my strategy guide this year, my team building guide, kind of reimagining the off-season calendar. right? And I think one of the things you look at when you get, when January hits, everyone wants to just jump forward and start looking at rookies, and that's fun. But you can make a lot of trades for elite players between January and April because people are overvaluing rookie picks. They're overvaluing rookie picks is like feeding, it kind of feeds like the dynasty adrenaline gene that people have. And, I think if you want to sort of take if you're in a game where you want to be one of 12 to win, right, taking a different angle on it, taking a contrarian approach, if you're right, it can be very, very amplified, because in a game where only 1 out of 12 people win, if you're different and you're right, you're printing money. So that's one of the things I look at with this is, everyone's kind of doing the same thing. And you look too, the other thing is like, we haven't solved it. Like with all the time and attention and energy given to rookie drafts, we haven't solved it. So like, ADP hasn't gotten more efficient. You look at, the performance among first round wide receivers, it's basically random, right? It isn't, ADP hasn't predicted better than just randomly drawn guys within like different rounds of the draft. And I think that says something, right? That probably says that we're spending too much time doing something we can't predict. So I've really leaned kind of against it. And ultimately I come back to being very much a pedigree drafter and the like with it.
I think that the peak happened to me right after our rookie draft. I got an offer for Stephon Diggs for George Pickens and Isaiah Pacheco.
Mm-hmm.
That felt like the peak of what you're talking about.
That's I have a scale of urgency with which you should accept trades. That's like run over your grandmother on the scale of urgency of like go to accept that trade. You know what I mean? Like that's exactly what you're talking about, right? Yeah, and you dial it down and look at it, right? Diggs walks out of bed, rolls out of bed and is catching 8.5 targets a game, right? Or being thrown 8.5 targets a game. And Pickens is like a 30% chance to ever produce a top 24 seasonal finish, right?
His theoretical upside is Diggs.
Yeah. And after a year, like I have some doubts about whether or not that's that's a reasonable expectation on a theoretical upside side. You know what I mean?
Well, not now.
But
this was last summer.
Yeah. Correct.
Summer, sure.
And Pacheco, like, he's fine, but
he's on the Chiefs,
there's a name that's escaping me. We've done this before with the Chiefs running back, and I can't. I thought he had initials. I don't know, but like, it seems like
Edwards Hilarious.
That's the guy. Yeah. Yes. Over Jonathan Taylor, right? Like, so
I remember some segments on the show we did on that.
Yeah. Yes. This occurred. And it's funny because I remember that night that happened, right? I mean, it was literally the last pick of the draft of the NFL draft. It was the last pick of the first round. And so you sat there for like 24 hours or 20, whatever, 21 hours until the next pick was made. And it was like hysteria. And I was like, is that good? I know we've said this for a while, but I was like, is that a good player to go there? And B, is it actually a good landing spot? And I was kind of like, you got like, I don't know, like $750 million invested in quarterback, tight end, and wide receiver. And ultimately we're going to change our offense for an undersized running back who's not that athletic. Like it didn't seem to be a particularly good approach.
Brian Westbrook, man. You don't remember Brian Westbrook?
Right. He was the only good receiver on those Eagles teams. And like, there's no way Clyde Edwards-Helaire was going to be even a number 3, probably.
Well, okay. Worst case, he's Deuce Staley, Jordan.
Right.
I mean, we're just going through Andy Reid running backs. Mm-hmm. It's just the coach is really the only prism you need to look at players through.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool. Well, I'll bring you in. Doesn't seem like you're a big George Pickens fan. I knew this on Twitter, but then I also knew it from the chat. As soon as I don't know if you saw this, but it was on the screen. Right away, the commenters in the chat, boom, asking about
Don't ask me
Pickens,
about
Pickens,
Pickens.
Pickens, Pickens, Pickens. So yeah, he's very polarizing. What a polarizing guy, this George Pickens.
Yes.
So if you love target depth, and you love early production from a major conference program, and from a 5-star prospect in particular, then you're going to really like him. If you want targets, well, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. It's too bad. It's just too bad for Pickens that targets are the most predictive of all of the stats that we have access to. It's unfortunate. It's unlucky, really, Jordan. It's just bad luck for him that he doesn't have the most important stat.
Yeah, yes. Yeah.
That's a fun face to make right there.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'll bring you in. I'm going to bring you in as the number one hater of George Pickens. I think that's what I'm going to bring you in as. So
I just want to make the record clear that that wasn't my idea to put that. That's your idea.
What do you mean it wasn't your idea? It was the chat's idea.
That's true. There you go. That's fine.
We're not at fault here. We crowdsource. Yes. We have a Discord. We go to Discord and we ask people to submit questions for these guests, and that's how I get a lot of my questions. It's none of it is. It's not our show at all. It's not under our control. It's them. Blame the listener. If it goes well, though, that's us. That's us. That's us. Welcome to the Mind of Mansion program. A football guy and a dynasty guy that also is very much not a George Pickens guy. Joining me today, it is Jordan McNamara.
Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for having me. This is going to be. I'm excited for this one. This is going to be fun.
This is. Let's get into the quarterback situation around the league. We're going to talk rookies later, but full disclosure, Jordan McNamara does not like to jump in with both feet into the rookie pool in February. He doesn't want to bathe himself in rookie hype. He tries to stay cool, calm, collected, clinical with his dynasty analysis. He's been hurt before by players like Kiaris Garrett, so he's more focused on veterans at this particular moment. But the show sheet delivered by me with questions from our Discord, go to PlayerProfiler.com and join the Discord and drive this show, inspired Jordan to dig deep into some rookies. So we are going to have plenty of rookie talk because it's necessary. If we're doing a dynasty show, you don't talk rookies, you're not really doing a dynasty show. Where are you? That's an existential dynasty question. Is it a dynasty show in February and March without rookie talk? But I just read a news item that Bob McGinn, who covers the Packers, insists that they are done with Aaron Rodgers. And it just so happens that he has just now returned from his darkness retreat. So I had to talk about that. We love talking about Aaron Rodgers on this show. Aaron Rodgers is a polarizing figure. I used to despise Aaron Rodgers. I'm warming up to him as he is taking himself a little less seriously in recent years, which is nice. God, he was so insufferable for many, many years. And he ruined Jeff Janis. So there's two things I didn't like about him. Now he's a little more self-deprecating, which is always nice. And then he goes on a darkness retreat into it. People say, "Oh, I go into a cave in the off season." It's literally what he did. He goes in a darkness. He's back from his darkness retreat. This fucking guy. Okay. So Bob McGinn, very plugged in. One of the most well-respected beat reporters out there, says he's not coming back. Do you think he's coming back? If you don't think he's coming back, I don't care where he ends up going, but where would you like to see him go?
Yeah, I get the idea that they're kind of sick of each other. They're like an old married couple that just kind of run it's just that's the way it feels, and they're just bickering about each other. Right? It's kind of how it feels. Um, I don't, I like, I think his market might be pretty small, right? Like if it's not the Jets, if it's not Vegas, and Tennessee, I think is a potential dark horse, right? But beyond that, like I don't know who sort of aspires to add Aaron Rodgers, right? So, I mean, I think, the Raiders have put out that they're not, that they want to go a different way. I don't know how much I believe that, right? And I don't know if they, what the cost is going to be, right? We might turn around in a couple of weeks and see a trade for Aaron Rodgers, and we're like, wow, that costs a lot less than maybe we thought, because I think the market could be smaller. But I think there's a chance with, even with a team like Atlanta, I don't necessarily think like they have a need at quarterback. I don't know if they're a good fit, right? I don't think that doesn't really fit their timeline, where I
Oh
think they'd be more
God.
of a Lamar team. You know what I mean?
Oh my
So
God, that sounds
yeah,
terrible. Yeah, they're not trying to win this year, are they? Are they equipped to
right.
win this year? No.
I don't think so. And you start looking around at it, and you like, do you want to go that route in the AFC? That's a whole nother question. Do you want to try and, if you're the Jets, what does Aaron Rodgers change for you? Probably your floor. I don't know if it changes your ceiling that much. And so, if you're the Raiders, I mean, it's the same kind of question, So I look at this and I think that there's teams in the AFC that could be interested. I don't know if they're going to trade him in the NFC, but I don't really know how much of a difference how much of a reality that he changes in the next couple of years, considering the level of quarterback play in the AFC. I think it's a rock and a hard place type situation with him.
He's going to go to the AFC. That's pretty much a fact. Then the question is, okay, within the AFC, the Raiders don't make a lot of sense because they're going up against the Chiefs and the Chargers. It's an impossible task. You know that the Broncos are going to be better this year. So that division, you have to build from the ground up. You can't just bring in a stopgap quarterback and expect to compete in the AFC West. That's not realistic. A division you could compete in right away with just any kind of upgrade at quarterback would be the AFC South, would be the Titans. I love that. I haven't heard a lot of the Titans, but the Titans are the best team. Like, they clearly are moving on from Tannehill. They have an out in his contract. It's over. He's not good enough. They've tried and failed to get there with Ryan Tannehill. You have the last couple of years of Derrick Henry's contract and career. Now is the moment. Now is the time. You already have your young wide receiver in Treylon Burks going into his second year. This is the team. I actually would love to place a bet on this. Titans over Jets, because Carr feels like the Jets' next quarterback. That's where you've seen the whispers. And then when they come in later, oh, no, it's not Carr, it's actually Rodgers. Don't fall for that, right? They've been locked into Carr for months, which means, okay, now we have the musical chairs at quarterback. Now he goes around the circle. Where does he end up? Tennessee. I love, and I actually like it. I think that's where he ends up, and that's also where I would like to see him land. He upgrades that passing game. They run a little less. That'll make their offense more efficient by not running as much. That's an upgrade for Treylon Burks at the quarterback position. He deserves quality quarterback play because I believe he does have ability. He's one of those rare big receivers to come along with some yards after the catch ability. Those guys just, don't come along every year. So when you have one, you want him to at least have some pass volume, have some accurate passes to catch and do something with. So I'd like to see him in Tennessee.
Yeah. And I just keep looking back at some of these. It's the same question like with Lamar. And I think it's the opposite is true. Like in the NFC, I just think there's more buyers than there would be in the AFC. But you look at some of these divisions, kind of like you said with the AFC South. Like, does a team like Tennessee want to reset? I mean, they're a year ago they were the 1 seed, and then they fired their GM. It's been kind of a weird year for them, but what do they aspire to be? I can't imagine that Vrabel's just going to say, let's tear this down.
No.
Like, they've got a defense that can win, like, as much as defenses can win in the NFL. Like, they have a good defense. So I think that's an underrated team. And again, if like Vegas is in the range where they could kind of reset the clock, I think they're a better team to reset the clock at quarterback and draft somebody, as opposed to Tennessee, who kind of has the makings of some win now pieces and could actually do some damage in their division. The Raiders are kind of capped, right? Unless they do something way different than everyone else is doing.
Well, the Raiders also have the 7th pick. Right, Tennessee doesn't pick until pick 11. They used a day 2 pick last year on Malik Willis. So the Raiders should just draft a quarterback at 7 if they want. I think they should do a full rebuild. I wouldn't do that, right? I would go offensive line and do a proper rebuild, like the Lions are the best example of a classic, prototypically sort of long view, optimal rebuild. That's what they should do, but that's a lot to ask from Al Davis's son, so it's not going to happen. So what they should do is go quarterback there. I think that would be interesting, and I think there's going to be a quarterback there. I think that this is an underwhelming quarterback class. I don't think there's any guarantee that a quarterback is going to go with the 101. Chicago just could end up keeping that pick, though they're trying to trade out. They could just keep that pick and go defense or go offensive line. And then a couple of those quarterbacks are going to get pushed down and out of the top 10. It is, once upon a time, you had Patrick Mahomes going at the 10 pick, right? And Deshaun Watson, right? They got pushed out of the top 10. Really, it was just Mitchell Trubisky.
Whoops.
So that was a better quarterback, a hell of a lot better quarterback class than we have this year. Right, and already they're like, yeah, well, Bryce Young has question marks around his size. And it's like, really? You think? That's funny. This is just coming up now. This is just now where this was a thing? No? 101 talk? Wait, really? Because I thought you're past it. The offenses are so spread out now. Height doesn't matter. Remember the bit that was the thesis for drafting Baker Mayfield. So that was wrong. That was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't draft Bryce Young. I don't have Bryce Young as my number 1 or my number 2 quarterback in this class for that reason. I'd rather have C.J. Stroud. Carr to the Jets. We agree. That's good for everybody. That upgrades the potential of the wide receivers, but then also it helps them be competitive. A team that's already ready to win now.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of Saints smoke with him too. Like, the Saints are another team that, like, what are they? Like, they just kind of want to keep pushing it in. And
I would say they could get a quarterback at 10, but they don't have their pick.
Right. Whoops. And as great as Olave is, like, you can't do that. I mean, that was just when they did that, I was like, you can't, like, Olave could be a Hall of Famer. And if you don't have quarterback fixed, it doesn't much matter. It was quizzical when they did it. I didn't understand that. And so maybe the solution is to pay Derek. Like, maybe, if you're not going to be able to draft a quarterback, right, then overpaying for Derek Carr in free agency seems like the most available solution to them, where I think the Jets have maybe other outs. So I'd be interesting, is there an actual bidding war? Like, do you want to get in a bidding war over Derek Carr is a whole other question. But the Saints are in a position where they might not be able to do much else. Like, they might have to sort of be in on Derek Carr as the solution because they can't get it a different way. I think they're in a really interesting spot. The Jets have other options, I guess. I'm not sure the Saints do. So there might be a bidding war there. I'm going to find that one pretty interesting.
I mean, if you're the Packers, you don't really care about the Saints, do you? Just let Rodgers go to the Saints. It's not going to happen, but that's... Oh, and the chat, yes, thank you. I know Mahomes was the 10th pick, yes, and Watson was the 12th pick. But
that's what you said, didn't you?
Well,
I thought you said that.
I thought I did, but I think that there was also sort of an implication that I said they were both outside the top 10. Jesus Christ, people. What level of annoying do you want to be? And like, the fine-grained criticism of exactly what you said, we got to parse it out. No, he wasn't actually the 11th pick. He was the 10th pick. I think I might have even said the 10th pick. Fuck off. Buzzards. I swear. This is a live show. This is what you have to deal with. So this rookie class, I think that Will Levis is going to wow some people with his arm. I think that C.J. Stroud is the truth at quarterback. I think he's not the athlete that Justin Fields was at Ohio State, but he's got everything else going on, so I'm excited about him. Anthony Richardson, I think, is going to inspire the imagination of a bunch of people. But once upon a time, Mac Jones fell outside the top 10. And, I want to say Fields was Fields the exact 10th pick? Was he the exact same pick as Patrick Mahomes?
He was the 11th.
He was the 11th pick. All right, so he also that counts as falling outside the top 10. I believe the 11th pick, Jordan, is outside the top 10. So this is what we're talking about here. Given that we've had Fields outside the top 10, Mac Jones, by the way, one of the most productive quarterbacks in college football history, and especially when you combine productivity and efficiency and accolades and awards and championships and all those things. Again, so no guarantees. We have any of these guys drafted in the top 10. How many, in this rookie class, how many do you think are going top 10?
So I'm a little spooked after last year, if I'm being totally honest. I'm looking at mock draft data. It seems like Anthony Richardson's creeping up, but we saw that last year and then it was 0. Right. So I am of a couple of minds. This almost feels like a post-election, like, do I trust the polls type moment of mock drafts?
Right.
It's kind of where I'm at and on trusting market data. I just look at the top of the board and I say to myself, I have a really hard time seeing some of these teams pass on quarterback, right? When you look at it, and even teams that might look like they have a solution. I mean, Colts at 4, but you have Seattle at 5 and Detroit at 6, who, if CJ Stroud's there for Detroit at 6, I mean, I would run to the podium and run over anyone in the way to select CJ Stroud at 6 if I'm them. Like, that is a gift. That is a gift. Vegas, I don't think he'll be there, but like, that is an absolute gift if someone gives you that. Vegas at 7, Carolina at 9. I mean, Tennessee at 11, right? And again, that doesn't even include Houston and, let alone what Chicago should do. So there's a ton of guys. I just have a hard time seeing how, like, Carolina has to, like, they as a franchise have gone through the whole reclamation project quarterback. This Frank Reich has done this. Like, they might have met at a support group for people that wanted to trust their futures in reclamation project quarterbacks. Like, if there's any pairing of team and coach that's like, let's figure out a solution, it's got to be Frank Reich in Carolina. So I think they're probably in on it. Are one of these teams in on Lamar? Like, I wouldn't necessarily rule that out either.
That's right.
So, I mean, I think, like, I don't know, I've adopted Detroit as my NFC team. Like, Detroit with Lamar is really interesting. Like, same way with Atlanta, but I mean, Detroit's got the picks, right? Again, I like Goff, but I just think Lamar changes your reality in a way that
Lamar really should go to the NFC South though, because it's wide open for him.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where I think he should go to either New Orleans, Carolina, or Atlanta. That's where he should go.
He's instantly going to be like, I don't know. I mean, he's going to be in the conversation as the best quarterback in the NFC. Like, if the moment he makes that move, right? I mean, it's not there's a lot of questions at quarterback. I mean, in the NFC North, right? They could be going through, if Rodgers leaves, right? What's Minnesota actually? What's Chicago? I mean, Detroit all of a sudden looks pretty darn good in that division. And that's a division where they could run up some wins and host playoff games. Again, I'm getting way ahead of ourselves because Detroit's hasn't done that. I don't know when the last time they've hosted a playoff game. It hasn't been anytime recently. But like, I look at some of these teams and I'm like, if you aspire to win a Super Bowl, like, Lamar Jackson can change your reality, especially in the NFC. So I don't think, Carolina at 9, and Detroit and Seattle both have 2 picks in the first round. Like, I think there's dark horse teams for Lamar and quarterback up there in a way that's, I think, really going to be fun to watch this year.
I suspect that the Houston Texans are going to get it all wrong. They need to go quarterback. They've been building incrementally. Now is the time to bring that antenna to put it on top of the tower. And I think they're going to go Will Levis instead of C.J. Stroud. That's my fear for them. And then that'll gift C.J. Stroud to the Colts at 4. And then it's up to Carolina and whether or not they're going to go quarterback, in Detroit, whether they go quarterback. I think Detroit genuinely does like Goff, and they may be out on every quarterback besides Levis and Stroud. And if they're not there, they don't go quarterback. I could absolutely see that. And then Carolina settling for a Bryce Young. I could see Anthony Richardson going to maybe Washington at 16. That would be good. Mm-hmm. Ideally, Detroit gets Anthony Richardson at 18. That's what I want to happen. That would be the dream. That would be if we were football gods putting players in the right situations to succeed, putting Anthony Richardson with Detroit at 18 would be best case scenario. It's very possible. It could happen. I want it to happen. And then for Carolina to just continue to be doomed for at quarterback with Bryce Young, I think that would be hilarious, and especially because they had Baker Mayfield for a minute. So just on so many levels, I think that's hilarious. So that I could see it 2-3. I think the answer is 2-3. It's a non-answer. I'm going to go 2. I think there's a chance that Carolina goes out and gets Lamar Jackson, or for whatever reason they end up trade down. Remember, some of these teams could trade out of the top 10 to teams that want to move up to take a position player, and that's how you would get only 1 to 2 quarterbacks drafted in the top 10. As it stands now, it looks like 3 quarterbacks are going in the top 10, but I could see a bunch of trades where only it ends up 1 going in the top 10. So yeah, I'm somewhere between 1 and 3. That's my super hot, high conviction take.
Is your 4? Are you pretty convinced that Richardson? With that, I think you're pretty convinced that Richardson's not going to be a top 10 guy. Is that, or do you think that Bryce Young is going to fall size wise enough to get out of the top 10?
I think that it's crazy that Mac Jones would go after Bryce Young just in terms of slot. I think it's nuts. Physically and productivity and every aspect of their prospect profile, Mac Jones was superior, and he went mid-teens. So I could also see Young falling to Washington at 16, and then that again setting up Richard. Whatever it takes. Really, I want to reverse engineer this so Richardson goes to the Lions. That's really what I want. That's what I want.
Yeah.
And I think that there's no reason for anyone to trade up for this Bears pick. I think the Bears are going to get stuck with it.
Do you have a take? I mean, do you think that they should, if they're stuck with the pick and there's no market to take it, they have to consider quarterback, right? Like,
really?
I don't know. I mean, you look back at the history of guys of teams that have passed, like Washington. I go back and I look at Washington where they had Dwayne Haskins, and they were like, "Hey, we think we may have a chance at the answer here," and they took Chase Young over Tua and Herbert, and I just like that's a disaster. And if you don't have the answer at quarterback, if you're not certain, like I think it's got to be a real conversation. I get this. I suspect that they probably know the answer internally. And it's information that we don't have. But as I look at his stats, like as I look at just his Fields as a passer, which I think ultimately you have to be, right? Even if you look at guys like Allen, you look at guys like Hurts, you look at guys that could run to start their careers, ultimately to get to elite status, to get to long-term viability as a starter, you have to pass too. And we've seen Hurts take the leap. We saw Allen take the leap. We've seen other guys take the leap, and we saw Fields regress. And so I'm sitting here like in year 3, kind of bumping up against that 50 start threshold that he's going to be creeping up on when guys start to bust. And I think like if this is, and maybe the answer is that this isn't the class that you don't think of those guys sort of in that light. And that's, I guess, a fair answer. And you say, if it's not Fields, we'll get it next year. I sort of get that. But if you don't trade down, like, I don't know how you've put yourself in a better position anyways. It's a,
I the top of the draft last year. Who were the top players?
Right.
Javon Walker, right? It was Thibodeau. Like 3 of the top 6 were edge rushers.
Right.
So it's probably Will Anderson.
Yeah.
It's Will Anderson. That's the chalk pick. I think that's the chalk pick. They were the worst defense in the league last year, and I say that because I know across all position groups in fantasy football, they were the team you wanted to play the most. Right? So yes. You got to start the process of rebuilding your defense, and Will Anderson is the perfect player for that. So I would do that. I would just go chalk with Will Anderson. I mean, Paris Johnson Jr. also 6'6", 315. So that the history of 101s being offensive linemen is not great. So you're bumping up against a bad history there, but I think you just, the NFL values edge more than we do as fantasy gamers. They clearly a lot, and it matters being able to pressure the quarterback. So I think that's the move. Sounds like I'm a little more in on Fields than you. For all the reasons why you're skeptical of rookies in Dynasty, I think you want to be skeptical of these rookie quarterbacks. It's very possible, if not probable, that only one of them actually ends up being a quarterback that is a playoff caliber leader of an NFL team. So right there, it's like you're better off investing in Fields. Also, if Fields isn't the answer, then your team is going to implode in 2023 anyway, and then you can draft a quarterback next year. So it's a win-win. You get to see Fields for one more year. If it doesn't work out, you go ahead and draft a quarterback next year. You'll have a top pick.
That's fair. And I think one of the traps I think we get into is there's a difference between value of guys on rookie deals versus trying to find the long-term guy. I think teams get in the trap of paying, like the Giants trying to figure out the Daniel Jones conundrum right now that they find themselves in. Like Daniel Jones, you just saw what he can do on a rookie deal where he costs next to nothing, right? That's a team that can go to the playoffs, right? If you pay him, that's a team that all of a sudden it's an albatross, right? There's a different, and I wonder if Fields is going to sort of be in that, even if if this is what he is, like, I don't know how you treat that going forward. And if like you've then used up basically, right? If you go through this year and he's kind of again this team and you're sort of languishing, you're 60% through a rookie contract and you haven't gotten anywhere. And so I don't know. I think it's an interesting conundrum that they find themselves in. I suspect that they're in on him, but I wouldn't necessarily rule it out.
You should be drafting first-round quarterbacks whenever you have the need and you see potential because of the windfall that you get from them. That's why it would be crazy. It would be insane for the Lions not to use at least one of these 2 picks on a quarterback. Right.
I agree with you.
Yeah, it would be just economically irrational from a team building standpoint, from the potential competitive advantage of having those quarterbacks on rookie deals. I also saw that JaMychal Hasty got a contract extension. Move the needle for you at all? JaMychal Hasty was catching a lot more passes, especially on a per snap basis and a per route basis. His ability to command targets, his target rate, was significantly higher than Travis Etienne's last year. But Travis Etienne was the prolific pass catcher at Clemson, which is weird.
It is. I I think Hasty's an underrated injury away guy, right? One of the big things I value in Dynasty is the ability to find guys that are cheap, that are an injury away from being put into a starting role. And you look and optimize the back end of your roster to have a bunch of those guys, and you start hammering on people, right? And so Hasty sort of fits in that formula, and a guy that's frankly pretty cheap. So I like that. And you get clarity early in the offseason, right? A lot of the problem with those guys is you don't get a ton of, you don't know as you're sitting here in February who's gonna be the injury away guy, right? This kind of puts Hasty on a much safer trajectory towards that. So I think it's really interesting at this point. And yeah, he's a player that I will be in on deeper in drafts because of the positional edge that he gives you.
Hasty had one game with 60+% snap share last year. Do you know how many fantasy points he posted that week?
I know it was a good game. Was that the game? Did he start it, or was that the game that Etienne got knocked out of? I think there was a game where I think Etienne had like 3 snaps. Was that the game that Hasty had had basically the big market share? I can't
against
remember.
Baltimore.
As I say here.
It was against Baltimore. 20 fantasy points. He was the RB5 that week.
Right.
And also 5 catches. So 5 catches. He put up 95 total yards, and he was 5 for 5 in the receiving game. And those 5 targets are 2 more than Etienne ever commanded in the NFL, ever. So is Travis Etienne overrated?
It probably matters what you're trying to accomplish, right? I think there's not very many guys that have multiple years of security, right? Is kind of the way that I would view the running back position. When you start counting, it's like less than 10. And so Etienne's one of those guys, right? So again, I think he's a safe floor guy. You look at guys, first round guys in the NFL draft that have hit for a top 24 seasonal finish, like they're pretty dense career trajectories. If you're hoping for a number 1 overall finish, right? I think there's a lot better bets probably at his cost. There might even be better bets cheaper than him, right? I think Najee Harris is more likely to finish as running back 1 overall than Travis Etienne is. And Harris is cheaper than him. So it depends kind of what you're valuing for. It's a really safe profile. It's safe kind of in the way that Jacobs was safe. Like Jacobs was really safe, multiple hits, first round guy, going to kind of keep that job. And then, when everything coalesces, it's really good. I think Jacobs' profile is better than Etienne's coming in, as we sit here right now. But that's kind of what you're hoping for with a first round running back. And in that lens, right, I think he's a safe floor guy. But if you're a massive ceiling guy, I'm not sure we necessarily see that.
That was a roundabout way to say Travis Etienne is overrated, Jordan.
Well, it's what are you measuring? If you're
12
measuring
fantasy points a game last year, and he was giving you that Josh Jacobs 12 to 14 fantasy points a game before Josh Jacobs had the moon and the stars align for him.
Yes. I mean, Jacobs has been a pretty consistent. He's a lesser version of Jacobs. I mean, Jacobs is like the first 3 years of his career was 15 points per game. Like it was a set it and forget it. I don't think Etienne was necessarily there. And I think Jacobs had shown different ways to beat you, right? He'd shown he could do it as a runner. He could show he could do it as a receiver. I'm not necessarily sure we're there with Etienne yet. But how far do you drop him? Right? Like there's only so many points you can take him below. I mean, you start talking about Swift. Like, what do you think of like that's at the 10, 11, 12 range of the running back position? I mean, it's really tough after that to put anyone over Etienne given what his profile is, right? I'm probably not drafting him in startup drafts in a super flex draft. If that answers your question.
You going Swift or Etienne?
I'm taking Etienne. Right. I'm taking Etienne because
you gotta go.
I mean,
this is the thing. This is the difficult spot that we're in. Outside,
right. I'm taking the guy that wasn't
the
benched
big
for
three, and the big 3 young running backs are Kenneth Walker, Breece Hall, and Bijan Robinson. Outside of those guys, it gets very, 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 very tricky. I mean, the next guy's like Saquon Barkley, and we don't know where he's going to play. We have Travis Etienne. We don't know if he can actually catch passes. We've got Austin Eckler and Christian McCaffrey who are past the age apex. What a tricky spot. Wow, running back, tricky spot. There was a guy that was in that tier who tore multiple knee ligaments. And he's on the J.K. Dobbins trajectory. Best case scenario, he comes back like week 3, eases himself in, is not really producing for fantasy until the second half of the year. That's Javonte Williams. And yet now we hear all the GMs like, oh, no, I think he's going to be back for week 1. I think he's going to be ready. I mean, that was the lie of the offseason. I mean, with a straight face. Just lie to our faces. Javonte Williams back for week 1. I hope he's back in September, but I'm planning on an October return for Javonte Williams.
Yeah. I mean, that's a valuable running back spot too with Sean Payton. I mean, his running backs averaged over 30 points per game in his time in New Orleans, right? That's an elite running back production. So I think the interesting part is who's going to be the guy behind him, right? Whether is it Latavius Murray? I mean, I'm sure they have to address something more than that. But if it's Latavius Murray or somebody else, right? Latavius Murray has the link with Sean Payton, so we'll see there. And if it's a short
Latavius Murray, best ball value right now.
Yes, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm interested in what they do, and I think that might tell us something too, right? You can all the fun stuff you can say at a press conference, right? When you actually start spending money and spending capital, that'll kind of tell you a little bit more with a little bit more clarity what they actually think of the Javonte Williams situation, right?
They're going to draft a running back in round 5, and everyone is going to get excited.
Mm-hmm.
They should move up and draft someone even earlier. I would love for it to be Tajay Spears. Right? Yeah. They draft Tajay Spears, and there's going to be a X number. I don't know what that number is, but X being a fuck ton of comps to Alvin Kamara because of the coach, of course. Nothing to do with the style or the efficiency in college or his size. He's 10 pounds lighter. No. He was Sean Payton and Sean Payton. But Tajay Spears is a satellite back plus. That would be Eric Gray, Tajay Spears to Denver. Makes a lot of sense.
Don Brand.
It makes a lot of sense, but they're liars. Now they have Sean Payton. Woof. Like a capital of football lies in Denver. Or is it now Buffalo? Because I heard Buffalo say, the front office claims that they're very confident in Gabriel Davis. Is that a bigger lie than that they're confident that Javonte Williams will return in week 1 in Denver?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how they get a ton better, right? Like that's the interesting part. And as I was sort of prepping some stuff for the show, and I've just been looking at some stuff for free agency, some stuff that I'm writing. Like, I don't know how you get a ton better than Gabe Davis. Like, is it like you look at the free agent market, and is it like DJ Shark? Like, is it Jacoby Myers? Like, how do you get substantially better and not it cost you a ton of money because the demand's high, right? In the rookie draft, it's a lot of the same problems. Like we have question marks. If someone falls to them in the first round, like if JSN is there, I mean, that's a smash pick, I think, for them. But I don't know how they get a ton better, right? That's the problem. And that's why when I see guys like, is it going to be 4 guys in the first round of the NFL draft? Like, I think that number is going to get pushed up just because the demand's going to be high, right? There's just such a shortage of wide receivers and they cost so darn much. You might as well just draft them in the NFL draft. So I don't know. I think they're in a tough spot of actually getting somebody.
It would be nice if they could get Quentin Johnston, but they'll never get him.
Right.
They'll never get him. That would be the best fit.
Right.
But they're not going to get him. They might have to go Zay Flowers. And is Zay Flowers definitively better than Gabriel Davis? I don't know. He's certainly not as big as Gabriel Davis. I mean, Gabriel Davis is a very specific type of wide receiver. There's not actually that many of them around anymore. We talked about Kiaris Garrett.
Right. Brought up that nightmare.
That's the archetype, right? The nice thing about Paris Campbell, DJ Chark is they can really stretch the field. Davis doesn't have that kind of speed. The nice thing about Jacoby Myers is he's super reliable, great hands, great route runner. That's not Gabriel Davis either. So there really isn't a Gabriel Davis in free agency. Gabriel Davis does have this sort of well-defined role in Buffalo, and there really isn't a path for them to upgrade it, which, looking at the free agent class at wide receiver, that's a great point. That does make you think, oh, wow, given how little there is available in free agency, we could see 7 wide receivers drafted in the first round. There's nothing stopping it. Like every year, it seems there's more wide receivers drafted in the first round than we were expecting. They keep getting pushed up. I mean,
for sure.
Nathaniel Dell in the first round, that would be a bridge too far, right?
Yeah, I mean, the market I don't think has gotten there yet. But like if there's props at like 4.5, right? You're getting like plus money on 4.5 if that's where they line up, because I think that's kind of where it looks like right now is the mock draft stuff. Like I would be very interested in exploring that as a bet, just because the demand it's high, and we usually get a guy that goes higher than we expect, right? I don't think a lot of people, Jahan Dotson wasn't necessarily a locked in first round guy last year, right? Like there's been other guys in prior years that have added elements that we as a fantasy community, we as a dynasty community don't necessarily appreciate, but NFL teams value highly, right? And they go higher than I think a lot of times we expect. So that's one of the, like, I am like, people get disappointed by rookie draft classes like this time of year. It's like a seasonal depressive issue. And then the NFL, the combine happens and all that stuff, and then it gets juiced up and everyone gets excited again. And like, I think you're going to get some guys vaulting up in this class. And I think by the time all is said and done, I think it's going to be probably better than we appreciate right now.
Zay Flowers, after the Shrine Bowl, making a big push. It really depends on his athleticism. Mm-hmm. He's 5'9", 180. He needs to be athletic. He needs to be super fast. If he's fast, first round pick. Jaden Reed, if he exceeds expectations, he's very similar to Jahan Dotson. They're very similar players, very similar games. Josh Downs, same thing. And when we were in Mobile at the Senior Bowl, NFL scouts love Rashee Rice. Rashee Rice is a little more size than these guys. If he's athletic, there's a lot of possibilities that now we're out to 10 potential first-round picks. There's not going to be 10, but you have to think, okay, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnson, Kayshon Boutte. That's your starting point. And then you just need one more guy to hit that prop. That's easy. That's easy money.
Yeah. And especially when you look at how much they cost, right? Like it's funny because you see teams draft tight ends in the first round, and then you look and you turn around and say, all right, like Hawkinson was he's a decent rookie contract guy, and he goes for a lot less than he was drafted for. And you look at all these other receivers who go for more than they were drafted for, and you're consistently pulling it down first round picks for these wide receivers, or early second round picks in the case of Chase Claypool. Like, it's a financial incentive as well, right? It is a team building incentive to just draft a wide receiver because the demand's high. Like, I don't know. I look at the tight end class. You can't lose. Like,
you can't lose. Really okay, we've decided to move on from Chase Claypool. To us, he's a bust. We just drafted George Pickens, and we'll put him on the market and get, I don't know, the equivalent pick that we drafted him for originally.
100%. It's like Dynasty. Like Dynasty wide receivers are kind of the same way. You almost get like a free look at a year, right? Like, if you draft a guy, you have to be careful doing it at the top of the board. But if you're sitting there, like, at the late first into the early second round of rookie drafts, and you're like, all right, I don't necessarily love this first round wide receiver. He's the last guy there. I'm just going to take him because of, we don't necessarily have a good way to sort it out, right? It's ADP is pretty random in terms of how predictive it is. And if push comes to shove in a year, I don't necessarily love where the guy's at. Like, there's a pretty good chance that the market does, right? Or there's a pretty good chance that I'm going to get pretty close back to what I got, right? So I think that's like a big lesson from all of this is like, just take the asset, right? But don't do that early. You want to kind of do that later. But you look at teams like, who's a smart team that's really consistently high floor? Pittsburgh. Why? Because like, just look at what they do at receiver. Like they rarely overspend, and they consistently draft guys, right? Because then they get the use out of them, and instead of overpaying them, they let them walk, or they do cheap extensions like they did with Deontay Johnson, right? Like it's like this.
Yeah,
it's
well,
not
this is one of the reasons why the Patriots are past peak, because they didn't extend Jacoby Myers a year ago.
Yeah.
They knew that he was going to roll off a year early because he was an undrafted free agent. They only had him for 3 years. You got to extend that guy as soon as possible. They knew what they had. It was a bird in hand, and now they're just letting him walk, and he could be the most expensive wide receiver in all of free agency, a straight-up possession receiver. Now, he is one of the best possession receivers in the NFL. Right. I love him, but he's not threatening you deep, and those guys have this additional value. But he's definitely the best of the non-field stretchers that's available in this class, and that's just a failure by the Patriots. Now I'm hearing that he's going to command Christian Kirk money, and I'm not in any way surprised.
I'm not either, right? I'm just not. The market's just going up, right? It just keeps going up, right? And it's the market's probably catching up to it, right? But again, this is part of the solution that NFL teams need to do is just keep drafting guys. Just keep over and over drafting guys. So in the second round, I mean, Cincinnati's done this, right? Like with, they get Higgins and Jamar Chase, and all of a sudden, like, they've got a juggernaut, right? After they had a guy like Tyler Boyd, like, they've successfully done that. I think the Bills, again, maybe it's not the first round, but you just kind of have to be in that every year. Like, you got to kind of keep drafting someone until you hit. And just, I think the way Pittsburgh has handled the receiving corps has been really smart, right? And they haven't necessarily gotten, outside Antonio Brown, they haven't gotten a dominant guy, but they've gotten, surplus value on a lot of these guys. And
what about George Pickens, though? They got Pickens.
They do have George Pickens.
Pickens he
profiles.
He profiles. He projects. He projects Jordan to be dominant.
That he does.
I've heard.
It depends.
I've heard.
Trying to project.
I've heard that there are projections where he is going to be dominant.
Yes. Yes. I've heard that as well. I've heard that as well.
Chark and Campbell, they're going to get Zay Jones money, but they're getting drafted later in best ball. That's where I think there's a value, right? What you're talking about is a way to mine value in both best ball and dynasty, is to realize that these guys, Myers, Chark, Campbell, they're going to get paid. Like it or not, don't think they deserve it? Okay, well, too bad, right? It's a supply and demand problem. You don't think that Josh Downs or Zay Flowers deserves to be in the first round? Too bad. It's a supply and demand problem. And you can either tilt at a windmill and yell into the abyss about it, or you can go ahead and invest in these players. I mean, that's what I did. That's what I did. I was in a best ball draft, and I came out with Campbell, Chark, Downs, Jaden Reed, Rashee Rice. Mm-hmm. You know what? You want to know why, Jordan? Because I'm not an idiot.
Right. There's going to be a demand for these guys. And it is going to be, it's like Christian Watson last year. You started seeing him, and again, we talked about, why don't you just pay attention to a ton of rookie draft content right now? Like, you could see, I didn't really need to know a ton about Christian Watson to consistently sort of see him popping up at the end of first rounds of rookie drafts. And then you saw him at, going 50, 55, 60 of dynasty startups and saying that guy's a value, right? Like, I didn't really need to know a ton about him, right? I didn't need to watch all of his film. I just could sort of look at that, and I said, there's a value opportunity to mine, right? I think understanding where the market's going to move. I think Jacoby Myers thing, like, we're going to be we're going to, in a Christian Kirk-like way, be like, he got how much money for how long? And people are going to be like, that's a bad contract.
Oh, yeah. Oh, just wait until we see what
Maybe.
Campbell and Chark get. Campbell and Chark are going to make people mad because they haven't done anything. So especially Campbell. Campbell legit hasn't done it. I mean, at least Chark has a 1,000-yard season.
Right.
Once upon a time. Campbell's done nothing. But he's very versatile. And there's going to be offensive coordinators that want him, right? That want to insert Paris Campbell into playbook.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was looking a couple years ago. I remember looking at the Tyler Boyd contract and being like, oh, and like they're going to easily get off of that money in a couple years. And I'm like, how horribly is that aged? I'm like, he's like a massive discount now compared to
your take. Yeah, it was a bad take by you.
Yeah, it was.
The contract aged great.
The contract aged great, and actually, the funny part is like the Corey Davis contract is very similar. Like it's not like it's very similar, and you're like, oh, when he signed it, like it doesn't actually look that good. But you're like, how much do you think if Corey Davis hit the market, he'd actually make right now? Like, it would probably be a lot more than we expect.
It's almost risk free. You have to be crazy. You have to do crazy stuff. You have to be crazy or lazy, right? And that's, again, what the Patriots are now. This is someone who was a Patriots fan for many years, and they're crazy and lazy, and that's why they're not going to be competitive anytime soon, because they're, A, lazy, not letting Jacoby Myers know how valuable he is and getting him extended, and then when they go out and invest in wide receivers, they invest in like two of the only wide receivers you could possibly overpay for, Kendrick Bourne and Nelson Aguilar. It's like a riddle. Like, it's impossible.
Right.
It's almost impossible to overpay. Like, the Jaguars are getting good value from Zay Jones, paying him $10+ million a year. That's a thing that's happening. Okay, that tells me that it's even if the Jaguars can't lose in the wide receiver market, it means you basically have to be crazy or completely lazy in order to fail at it. And really, the Patriots are the only ones. I mean, it's a cliche that they can't figure out how to acquire wide receivers since Randy Moss, the Randy Moss curse, but it's true. It's true. I mean, this makes it no longer something that's a superstition. That's actually just a fact. They're just bad at acquiring wide receivers. When they draft a guy, it's N'Keal Harry. When they sign a guy, it's Nelson Aguilar. When literally everybody else is great. Could have had DK Metcalf. Right? It's like everybody else. It's like if you actually think about it, it'll really, if you're a fan, it'll really frustrate you. It'll really make you mad. But the one thing though that I keep coming back to is that this wide receiver class isn't actually that exciting. And what you're saying is it doesn't matter.
I think that it's probably not going to matter, right? Because, and one of the, like, I love classes that aren't exciting because they become devalued, right? Everyone's been talking about 2023 picks since like 2021. Like, this has been like an ongoing, it's almost a bit. Like, if you were just dropped into this, you'd be like, you're talking about picks. How many, how could you possibly know that? And lo and behold, we're in a situation where we're 2 months from the draft and everyone feels a little bit disappointed.
Well, specifically, it's disappointment with the quarterbacks and the wide receivers. The running backs are delivering.
Sure.
Right? The running backs are delivering to the extent where now we're getting gifts. We're getting bluebirds landing on our windowsill in the form of Roshan Johnson and Tajay Spears. And then we're going to get the combine. They could shred the combine. A bunch of guys could come out and shred the combine and make it even. So I think that the prestige of this running back class is only going up, but these other classes are sinking.
Yeah. And I love drafting in deep running back classes, right? That's a place where I love to be,
Yes.
and I like to if everyone's down on the receivers, like if that's going to open up some value, like if it's a situation where that causes first round wide receivers to fall into second round of rookie drafts, like that's has been a really good formula to just getting guys cheap. One of the things that I don't spend a ton of time and energy trying to get rookie wide receivers in Dynasty because the hit rates are bad, but then the market will just allow you to sort of take, Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, right, Brandon Ayuk, guys like in the second round, first round wide receivers in the second round of rookie drafts, and you just sort of do that. You just take the player, and you don't necessarily worry too much about it. And like that's been an awesome strategy, right? So you start looking at these, and again, if that is the result of this, right, I'm probably going to be interested in some wide receivers at the end of the first round, end of the first and into the second round of rookie drafts.
But early in the first round, you're happy to go running back because you know you're going to get those early years when they produce the majority of their fantasy points. Half of running back fantasy points are produced before age 24.4. That's in this book, by the way, the Dynasty Dominator book. It's on Amazon. There's a Dynasty that stat's in there.
Yeah, and
so I'm happy. It's like the 105. I'm happy to go running back there. Happy to.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Go. Yeah. Right. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Now we have more team building, team structure questions. 10 burning Dynasty questions for Jordan McNamara coming up next. Ten burning Dynasty questions for Jordan McNamara, and thank you to our friends at Epson hooking me up with the laser projector that my daughter's currently enjoying. She's been watching. She's in a movie marathon. We have a snow day, but it's also her second day wearing braces. I don't know if you've ever. Yeah, it's not good. It's not. She's in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
She also has an overbite, so there's a bunch of things going on. So she was basically just, hey, we've got Jell-O and ice cream and movies, and that's what we're doing. And she's really enjoying the Epson. Now, 10 burning Dynasty questions. Bijan Robinson is the consensus 101, but is he the RB1 in Dynasty?
So I think he has a claim for it. I'd like to see him drafted in the first round. And then you have basically, who does he compete with? Well, Breece Hall's coming off a knee injury. Right? How great do I feel about that after the J.K. Dobbins situation? And Jonathan Taylor, right, I think is the other person that could be up there. He's coming off an injury. I feel better about him, but again, he's mid-career. And
I have bad news for you. We don't have any of those guys in our RB1 spot in Dynasty.
You don't have any of those guys. Well, you can. There's other guys you can.
We have
go
Kenneth
in there
Walker.
With, right? You have Kenneth Walker. Okay,
yeah.
That's fair too. I think again, the interesting part about I think it's super contrarian to have Walker ahead of Hall, but I don't think if you sit here and have looked at the way the Dobbins knee injury has happened, it's basically the same injury that Hall had. I'm not super thrilled about that, right? I'm not super thrilled about how that happened, and you want to value him he hasn't dropped in price at all, right? That's odd to me. So I do think having Walker up that high, and again, it dropped Javonte Williams, but it hasn't dropped Hall. Why, right?
I want Walker, man.
Yeah, no, and I don't think. I think Walker's awesome. The only question I'd have is what's his receiving ceiling, But you know, but again, so then Bijan Robinson, like how do you sort of value that? Again, at least he's healthy, right? Like you put him against Brees Hall, you're like, do I want to take the injured guy? Do I want to take the guy that's on a rookie deal coming out, is probably going to test pretty well. He's an awesome performer and isn't hurt, right? I mean, I think Bijan Robinson belongs up in that conversation of 1, 2, 3. Then it's kind of a depending on what you feel and comfort, what you're trying to accomplish.
Well,
I think
Kenneth Walker has an 8-target
safe.
game on his resume, and he had a bunch of 3-target games. And these were in games. He had 3 targets in a game with a 23% snap share. He had 3 targets in a game with a 13% snap share. He didn't start playing the primary back job in Seattle until week 6. He then missed most of week 13, missed week 14. And then I look at his overall stats, and I'm like, well, this guy caught 27 passes. So he's going to have a 50-catch season. Like, spoiler alert, he's going to have a 50-catch season. So if a guy has a 50-catch season in him and he's already one of the best runners in the league and put up 13.5 fantasy points in his age 21 season, and I know I'm going to get his age 22, 23, 24, 25 season coming up, and he's not coming off a knee reconstruction, I'm just trying to post a guy up in my RB1 spot, set it and forget it and move on. That's what I'm trying to do. I have the whole rest of my dynasty draft, Jordan, to take chances. So you can call us conservative, fine. But there's unnecessary risks I see people make in the beginning of dynasty startups, and it's always befuddling to me. I'm like, you have so many rounds. We have so many rounds. We have 25 rounds in this dynasty startup. Why are you kicking it off with high-risk moves?
Don't miss early, right? I think if you're trying not to miss early, Walker's a really good pick, right? Like, again, I think Hall probably has a higher ceiling, but I think Walker's substantially safer just off the knee injury. Like, do you want to buy a knee injury? Right? Like, is that how you want to start your dynasty draft? No, I'm good. Like, I don't know. It's an interesting spot. I think then you ask your question, like, do you want to pivot off of Brees Hall in existing leagues, and sort of what does that look like? I think that's an interesting place too. Like, I have him in a couple of spots. Like, I've tried to explore it, and I think it's an interesting, how far down you want to move and sort of what you're trying to accomplish getting back.
What did you offer, and or when you explored these trades, what kinds of potential deals did you see coming back?
I didn't get a ton of counters. Like last year, I did something that I think was pretty counterintuitive, but really worked out. I gave Najee Harris, and I think I gave like a mid-second for Austin Eckler in a 2023 first. And my theory of that was, I'm going younger-ish. Najee Harris isn't young, but I'm going younger-ish to older, right? But I'm also going up in production, right? At the time, there's a big difference in terms of how they were viewed projection-wise and how they were viewed by redraft markets. And so I said, okay, like I'm probably getting a pretty big edge, and it's a position that's pretty vulnerable, right? It's not super durable long-term. You got guys coming off of, injuries can change these values pretty quickly. I'll just sort of take the liquid first and try and beat Najee Harris in the meantime. And I was able to basically do both, and now Eckler's worth more. So crazy. I think exploring
and you have a first rounder for a team that had Najee Harris last year. So teams with Najee Harris last year are generally picking in the top 5 in rookie drafts.
Yes. I think the pick was like 6 or 7, something like that. And then I was able to use it to get a quarterback, which was ultimately the long-term goal of that was to solve my quarterback situation at Superflex. So, but yeah, I mean, so that type of thing I think is interesting. It's different. I think you can get those deals done. Like it's hard to go from, Hall to Walker plus, right? Those deals no one's really making those deals on the other side of that typically. Like those I think are harder to do. But if you offer someone youth especially at a risky position, and you can sort of beat the production now while also adding future insulation. I think that's a pretty savvy way to go about it.
I love it. I love it. But it's fluid, right? Bijan and Breece Hall are not far away from Kenneth Walker. And if we hear great news about Breece Hall, well, that's new information. It's a Bayesian process. Like, the risk factor on Hall goes down. He then passes Walker. Like, but if you run out to best case scenario, what are you going to do? Right? What are you going to do with Hall? What if good news comes? You're going to push him even higher? He's already at 1.
Right.
You're going to push him. There's no higher than 1. Like, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to operate in that way. And the same thing with Bijan. There's a lot of unknowns. We don't know where he's going. We don't know which round he's going to be drafted in. We don't know how he's going to test. How the hell can that be the RB1 at this point? Get out of here. It doesn't even make mechanical sense if you're just thinking about how rankings work and how they move fluidly through space as the months progress. What about the number 2 running back? Have you started to see a consensus forming around the number 2 running back in this class?
And you're talking specifically in 2023?
Yeah, the 2023 rookies after Bijan Robinson. Are you seeing a coalescing around a particular running back?
I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs, like, you look at Grinding the Mock, look at some of these other mock draft aggregation sites, that's consistently who comes in as second, right? And that's interesting too, because it's right around a first, second. Like, he's right around the line of being a first or second round guy. And there is a difference there historically in terms of performance, ceiling, floor, all that stuff. So that's interesting to see if he can maybe creep into the back end of the first round. But that's the one that I'm seeing. And then it looks like a pretty big tier break after that.
Yeah, I mean, the issue with him is, and the reason why Bijan is so clearly the 101 is he's 200 pounds. So he doesn't project to be a workhorse. He's never had a 1,000-yard season in college. He was their main satellite back, 44 catches. He's going to be great, right? He's going to be great in an Austin Eckler role. One day I could see him getting 200 carries, but it's not going to be happening right away for him at all. So let's go to question number 2. This is your wheelhouse. Talk to us about your dream build. You're in a startup. What's going through your mind when you're trying to stack particular positions round by round?
Yeah, if it's a super flex startup draft, I want to get elite quarterbacks, right? I want to get 2 of them. I'm willing to trade up to do it. Historically, I haven't done that until the last couple of recent years. My research in my yearly analytics at Dynasty guides, my team building guide this year kind of lays it out why in sort of granular detail and sort of how we did and how I've done it. But getting 2 elite quarterbacks, if you have 2 elite quarterbacks, your floor is very high and your ceiling is very high. It allows you to, do some different things. It allows you to make mistakes. If you're in Superflex, you can win without elite quarterbacks, but it's a lot harder, right? And I would much rather sort of take the easy route. It's the longer term bet. And you want guys that have done it, and you want guys that have both ceiling and floor, right? That's the crux of it. So that's what I'm aiming for early. Don't miss, right? That's kind of the deal. And then where I go from there kind of matters a little bit. I play in a lot of tight end premium leagues.
By the way, Scott Connor, you know Scott?
Yes.
At Charles Chill FFB on Twitter. He came on a couple weeks ago, has the exact same approach in Superflex startups. I'm going to bend my will to get 2 elite quarterbacks.
Yes. That's funny because he was a contributor to a prior edition of the Analytics Dynasty. So not surprising there to see him share that view. In tight end premiums, I'm kind of hammering the position early because I think they can make a difference. The problem is at wide receiver and running back, again, a lot of the problems we talked about with running back. At wide receiver, it's a pretty flat, it's just a flat position. They don't ring up a ton of differences. So I want to pay from that, right? I want to pay from taking wide receivers to take 2 elite quarterbacks, and that way I can just sort of hammer people.
Yeah, I mean, you're loving life. I mean, if you're sitting there in the first round and someone goes CeeDee Lamb and that allows you to get a quarterback you didn't think you were going to get, you're thrilled.
Yes. It's a gift.
CeeDee Lamb's great, but like that, he's not an elite quarterback in a super flex league. That's the difference. So then from there, so let's say you have your 2 quarterbacks. You may have had to trade up to get one of those. So then you might not even have your 3rd round pick. With your next pick, are you seeing if you can get a young elite running back if available? What if none are available?
Yeah, it usually costs you to pay up, right? Usually that kind of strips you of 3rd, 4th round, sort of in that range. Yeah, if you're drafting twice in the 1st round, for example, you're probably not picking in the 2nd round, right? So that's really where it strips you from. So then you got to catch up, right? If it's a tight end premium league, I play in a lot of 2 PPR for tight ends. Like I'm coming back with those next picks and sort of addressing that position. If it's
Hawkinson?
not a tight end, I like Hawkinson. I like Kittle more. I don't think
I was
Hawkinson
assuming Kittle
has
be
tight end
gone.
overall.
I was trying to gauge your
Yeah.
your appetite for the tight ends that are outside the sort of Andrews Kittle zone.
Yeah. Hawkinson, I think Goddard's got a better chance to post a tight end 1 overall season than Hawkinson does.
Oh, really?
Yeah, just when you look at it, the guys that produce the tight end 1, like the top tight end 1 finish, do so on like 2.1, 2.2 or beyond yards per route run. And Hawkinson just doesn't do that. And so you're really dependent on him, A, having a ton of volume, and B, scoring a ton of touchdowns. I think Goddard walks out of bed and runs for 2 yards per route run, and is like elite in terms of that, if those efficiencies. Like, I think he's got a better case to be a tight end 1 overall than Hawkinson does. It's a very limited number of guys that can actually do it, but I would bet on Goddard more than I would on Hawkinson. Outside of like that, though, it's a very flat position, right? I don't want to really. I'd much rather go another position than pay for, tight end 7 versus tight end 13, right? Like, that's not a place where you should really spend a ton of money making, or a ton of of your picks making those decisions.
So you're going to hope that you can get your hands on a Kittle, on an Andrews. What about Pitts? Is Pitts essentially the George Pickens of tight ends?
No, I think he's better. The thing that I question about Pitts, and I go back and I kind of kick myself a little bit for not being stronger on this. When you look at tight ends, there has been 9 guys that have finished as the tight end 1 this century. That is the lowest of any position, and it is essentially, it's extremely difficult to get to the efficiency, and it's extremely difficult to get to the amount of targets that's necessary to do it. Right? And
can I try to name them real quick? So we have Rob Gronkowski, we have Travis Kelce,
Yep.
We have Jimmy Graham,
Mm-hmm.
We have Antonio Gates,
Yep.
We have Tony Gonzalez.
Yes.
And now I'm struggling. I got 5.
There's an active player. There's another active player.
There's another active player.
Mm-hmm. 2021 tight end 1.
Mark Andrews.
Wow.
So Mark Andrews outscored Travis Kelce that year?
Yes, he did.
He did.
Dallas Clark.
He did that.
Dallas Clark.
That's a
Dallas
good
Clark.
one.
I
didn't remember him doing that.
Yeah. I think it's Witten. There's a couple early of the century guys, but the like when you actually break it down on paper. Yes.
What a name.
And and so it's either been really like guys that have done it multiple times. Like, you're more likely to have done it 5 or more times than to hit 1 hit. Right. So, like, to 1 hit is do that. So I think Andrews, like, so when you compare the 2 of them, like, I would much rather have Andrews because I know that he can get to the volume, and I know that he can sustain the efficiency on the volume when it happens. Right. That's the key to the tight end position. So I should have been stronger on Andrews over Pitts. It's research that I found kind of after the fact. I like Pitts. I think he's the natural tight end. He's a natural top 3 tight end. Again, going Kelsey this early in the offseason doesn't feel super safe because I think there's a potential retirement angle to him that maybe we don't necessarily know all of his decision making on that process. So I think that varies a little bit. I think Pitts is in the top 3. I feel a lot better about Pitts than I do necessarily Pickens, but I think it's more of a high floor case for him than anything.
It's why we're rolling out the win now versus rebuild mode for our dynasty rankings, because, yes, we know that Goddard is more efficient and is more established than, say, Pat Freiermuth, but Freiermuth has a significant age advantage, right?
Yes.
And, their fantasy points per game have been similar recently. So and same thing with Hawkinson and Kittle, right? Where Kittle's actually like 3.5 years older than TJ Hawkinson. And so at what point do you prefer Hawkinson just based on you're going to get a lot more years out of him in his prime than George Kittle? It becomes very tricky. If you're in a win now mode, you're going to go Kittle. If you're someone who's trying to do a productive struggle, well, if you draft Kittle, well, you're hoping that he's going to produce for you in his age 30, 31 season. You're not even going to really be able to get the value out of him in his age 29 season, which is probably going to be his best season, especially if they get good quarterback play in San Francisco. So that's where it becomes tricky. It's a little less tricky with Freiermuth and Goddard because Goddard's only 28. But Christ, Goddard's 28.
Goddard's
I had
older
no
than
idea.
Andrews. Goddard's older than Andrews is.
It's a tricky thing, man. It's a tricky thing.
Yeah.
So that's why you say, oh, well, so if you don't have the ability to toggle between win now and rebuild, those players, Hawkinson and Kittle, they'll have similar valuations. Same thing with Goddard and Freiermuth. But then if you were to toggle to, say, win now, boom, like Kittle jumps up. Right, mm-hmm. Goddard would smash Freiermuth, and so on. So, thinking about trading the 101, that's a popular topic on social media and on YouTube, but it doesn't actually happen in real life. Have you actually seen the 101 get traded this year?
You're talking about rookie 101, right?
The rookie 101. Sorry, when I say the 101, yeah, that's right. The rookie 101. Yeah.
I haven't. People have asked, like, do you go down to 2? Do you go down to 3? Do you take like Breece Hall? I mean, if I'm going to trade the 101 as it sits right now, I'm trading it for an elite quarterback, right? Like that is in a deal to get a Mahomes or Allen. Like that's stop what you're doing, trying to fix everything else, take the elite piece and get an elite piece, right? That's would be my approach.
And no one's going to give you Jamar Chase for the 101 because generally speaking, the top tier wide receivers, at least the top 2, are more heavily valued than any of the running backs. So you're not going to gain anything. You're not going to. That's not going to trade that's going to happen.
Yes.
So the only real way forward is to engage with a member of your dynasty league that has 2 really good quarterbacks. That would be the path forward if you actually wanted to trade the 101. But we're in agreement. You wouldn't trade it now. You would trade in like 2 months.
Yeah, or if like Allen or Mahomes were available, right? And honestly, like I don't even think that these 2 guys need. Like you'll be amazed at some of the trades that actually people will sell those guys for. I can't, like, it's not a place that, like, if I get them, like, it's like you're not going to get them away from me. It's kind of the way like you could offer me almost 200% on them and I probably still wouldn't trade them. Like the 101 is too cheap. Like the 101, the first pick in Dynasty Superflex drafts is too cheap for those guys, right? It's just not right. It's just not. It's too cheap for them, right? And so it doesn't appropriately show how far away they are from the rest of those guys. And so I think like when you look at that, I'm way willing to overpay on them. And so when I say include like Justin Fields in 101 might get you one of those guys, and I would pay that like instantly. Like that's an instant pay for me.
That's right. There's 6 guys There's 6 guys. It's some combination, whatever ranking you have, of Herbert, Burrow, Allen, Hurts, Mahomes, and Lawrence. And there's no position player that can compete with those guys in their valuations in the Superflex. In some cases, you would literally need 2 CeeDee Lambs to afford a Jalen Hurts, right? And then you wouldn't even do it, right? So the valuations are that skewed. So don't have a conversation with me about drafting any position but a quarterback in the top half of a Superflex startup. Just don't know, right? That's why I did do one deal in a Superflex league where I was able to acquire Herbert. I did give up Tua in the deal and a bunch of other assets. But that I was able to get Herbert was a huge win. It required a lot of negotiation. I don't typically do that much negotiation, and so it was a rare thing. But it felt like an incredible accomplishment when it finally got that deal done.
Yeah, it makes you sleep a lot better when you get
and it's crazy. Like Tua had a season no one expected, and I still feel fine about it.
Yes, 100%.
Isn't that crazy?
100%. Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. And when the best way you can like think about it is like I have a couple of Allen Mahomes teams. And you know what the other person is saying when they open the page? It's like oh shit. Like they're looking at your roster and they're like, oh shit, I got to deal with this week. Like that's what you want to do at the quarterback position. Like you want people to think that about your teams. And if you do that, that's your mindset and you do that, like you're going to be way ahead because they run up a huge edge.
Now, of the quarterbacks that are not in that group, we've got Lamar Jackson. There's uncertainty around him. There's question marks around him. His long-term viability as a rushing quarterback, where he's going to play. Deshaun Watson. What the hell was that last year? And is his career just headed down a dark path? Right? Is he just not what we thought he was? We know he's not the person we thought he was, but now is he just not the player we thought he was? And then there's this shining potential, the ultimate potential of Trey Lance, where he has the big arm, the size, and the mobility. So that would be the path, right? If you wanted to break in and find the next quarterback that's going to eclipse all the other position players, you'd have to take a chance on one of those guys. That's why Deshaun Watson is the most frequently traded player in Dynasty right now, because there's a bunch of people that are willing to say, hey, this position is so hard to get edge on, right? It's so difficult to get any kind of leverage on my competitors at the quarterback position. I got to take a chance. And there are some people that have this, and they're like, they have Trey Lance, they have Deshaun Watson, they have Lamar Jackson. They're like, well, what are you willing to pay to take that chance? This is a pretty tantalizing opportunity to acquire one of these guys. Let's talk, right? Let's talk. So, I mean, yeah. I'm guessing that you prefer Lamar Jackson of those guys, but what about Watson versus Lance?
I mean, this is why just as a strategic point, when these guys become available, you have to pounce, right? So in a number of drafts, I basically traded the equivalent of Mac Jones for Deshaun Watson. I think you have to do that, right? When these guys become available, you have to pounce low, right? And
you did that deal?
I did that. It was a little bit more complicated than that.
Holy
it was like
shit.
108.
Nice job.
It was like 108. In like a second. Like it wasn't specifically them, but the pick was used on Mac Jones, so it was a little bit more.
Right.
But again, you spend a lot of time doing those things. Like I think Kyler's really interesting. Like, can you get him? At what point does he become the appropriately priced discount? Right. So all of these guys, I'm constantly thinking about buying low on elite profiles. Watson is one, right? When you look at guys that are the career leaders in yards per attempt, the active leaders, Jimmy Garoppolo is one. I don't think any of us really believe that. I think that's a Kyle Shanahan stat. Number 2 is Deshaun Watson. He's ahead of Patrick Mahomes. I will bet on that. And I'm not going to bet on him as a person, but I'm going to bet on that as a rebound, right? I'm going to bet on that as a rebound. I don't know what
over Lamar Jackson even? No, you said Lamar, right?
No, after Lamar. I would take him after Lamar.
You'd rather have Lamar, but what about Kyler? Do you rather have Lamar over Kyler or Kyler over those guys?
I would rather have Lamar.
Oh,
I'd rather have Lamar.
wow. Really?
I'd rather have Lamar. Yeah, I just trust Lamar more than I trust Kyler Murray, if I'm being totally honest. Um, I just trust Lamar. Uh, and actually, in my dynasty tiers, Murray actually comes in. I sort of categorize players a little bit. Murray actually comes in with more security than Jackson does. However, um, I think Jackson will surpass him once he gets his contract this year. So that's kind of my take on him. So I'm a Lamar Jackson guy. I think he's like a pretty good first round. I just traded for him, and I felt awesome about it. Right, I gave a couple of mid first and Aaron Rodgers for him. Again, these guys, they become available. They become cheap. Like, yeah, I think you have to pounce, and consistently being sort of trying to upgrade the position is where it's at in Superflex.
We're going to wait. We're going to wait and see with Lamar Jackson what happens. And once there's some more certainty around where he's going to be playing and what his contract's going to look like, he's only going up, right? Once the certainty locks in, then the valuation rises. That's how it works, right? I'm fascinated by this next question. I think we're on question 4. Buckle up. We have a bunch of running backs that are 27, sometimes 28, and they are disproving this idea that running backs are dust at 27. I mean, for many years, we had LaDainian Tomlinson and Matt Forte playing out to age 30 and being super productive, but never mind that. Recently, the Le'Veon Bells and the David Johnsons, just they were absolute dust at 27. That was seen as the new norm. Now these new running backs are changing that, right? And yet I still see the divergence between running backs and wide receiver valuations in Dynasty continuing to widen, even though it looks like running back is a pretty strong position. It's odd.
Yeah, I mean, what I think you start facing at that range of the position is you start facing concerns about longevity, especially contract-wise, especially touch-wise. So you start looking, and I sort of group my guys in tiers for my website and for my subscribers. I group them in kind of tiers, and like, look at the guys that are on second contracts that are kind of in 1 year security windows. It's Eckler, it's Mixon, it's Cook, it's Henry, Aaron Jones, Chubb, Kamara. We'll see there. Fournette again. We'll see there. But Elliott, that's a question too. James Conner actually comes in and is like, well, I actually feel decent about his workload this year. Like, when you start looking at those guys, like, there's guys that are in that range, but that's an age that's going to there's going to be some attrition there. And there might be guys that sort of go past that. Again, I like Eckler to sort of age well relative to those guys. The workload's not that high, right? When you actually look at him, like, there's a reason why I think he's the most expensive of those guys. He has an elite ceiling, and he's coming off of like a running back 1 finish and a running back 2 finish the past 2 years. He was 2 in 2020, 2021, I guess. So there's like, his workload isn't as high as some of these other guys. So I do think you're seeing a little bit of that. But again, I think there's a chance that a number of these guys end up being, I think Mixon has seen his better days, right? I think some of these guys we could look at in a year from now, and they have severely, severely dropped. And honestly, that's one of the reasons why I think like James Conner is a pretty good arbitrage candidate right now, because I think he's relatively safe compared to a lot of these guys that are going more expensive than him.
Yeah, it's like the perception that we're going to get with Dalvin and Mixon and down the board, that hit James Conner last year, right? So we already got it over with. We already took our medicine with James Conner, so that's fine. You could argue that even with Ezekiel Elliott.
Totally.
Totally. Ezekiel Elliott, we've already taken our medicine. Like, no one's out here standing for Ezekiel Elliott, and there'll be very few people, that are enthusiastic at all about a guy like Dalvin Cook. And now we've seen, when you look at the tiers, McCaffrey and Eckler are in a completely different tier now. They're in a tier together, well ahead of all these other guys that are 26, 27. And it makes sense. They don't have as much wear on the tire, but also they have higher ceilings because they're complete target magnets. So beyond Eckler, give us a couple other running backs you're targeting in trade, you're trying to acquire in Dynasty.
Najee Harris. I mean, he led the league in receptions as a running back receptions as a rookie. That's tough to walk away from in terms of, when you become like running back 10, 11, 12 after in a rookie contract, and you've done that. Like, that's pretty appealing. James Conner's another one. I just think he's a good arbitrage down candidate from a lot of these guys that we're talking about.
Yeah.
I don't understand why Akers and Dobbins are trading at substantially different prices. Like, I think they have a lot of similarities in their profile, and Dobbs is going like 10 running backs, 12 running backs higher, depending on where you're looking. I think those are that's an interesting play to open up.
What?
Akers.
What?
Yeah, there's some dynasty valuations that have Akers as like a mid-teens guy, and excuse me, that have Dobbins as a mid-teens guy and Akers in the like right around 30.
Oh, what? No, we're the opposite. We like Akers. Akers is not mid-teens, but I prefer Akers.
He's down by 30, right? I mean,
well, that's where Dobbins should
I'm with
be.
you. I agree with you.
Isn't that where Dobbins should be? What are we talking about? Isn't this weird?
Right.
Do you ever see this happens to me
weird.
sometimes in Dynasty,
Absolutely.
where I feel like I'm living in a prank opposite world? Do you ever feel that way?
Yes, all the time.
All the time. It's like,
Yes.
What? Like,
Yes.
my concerns around Akers were alleviated substantially, and the risk that they replace him is very low. They have so many fish to fry in LA. They have so many priorities, and they've been punting picks for so long that the last thing they're going to do is draft Bijan Robinson or something. It's like, that's not going to happen.
Right.
I think Akers is actually pretty safe.
Yeah, I'm with you.
That's crazy. I think Akers is in the same conversation as Javonte Williams. Is that a hot take?
He's got less insulation, right? He has less safety in his profile than I think Javonte Williams does, like from a contract standpoint, right? Javonte Williams is less likely to have someone drafted over him in the next couple of years than Akers is. And again, Akers will be a free agent, so you have to deal with that. But again, that's probably a case for Javonte Williams overvalued and Akers is undervalued, right? I don't know if I'd put
crazy.
Akers ahead of Williams, but yeah, I'm with you.
I mean, I don't see much of a difference. I really don't.
Yeah.
I mean, they're both coming off injuries. One guy's injury was a year earlier, and one guy's actually going to be out there in as far as we know, 100% for week one. Their skill sets aren't that dissimilar. I think that Javonte Williams is a better yard creator and better in the passing game, but it's not that much different, and certainly not a big difference. J.K. Dobbins. What are we talking about? We don't even know who the quarterback's going to be in Baltimore. We have no idea what's going to happen. I mean, talk about uncertainty.
Yes.
Whoa.
Yes.
Whoa.
Yes. It's wild.
Wild. I love this.
Yes.
So I promised we wouldn't get too deep into the rookies, but we do have some rookie questions from the Discord. Rookie running backs that you want to see test the most. Who are you most intrigued to see test of the rookie running backs?
Sean Tucker.
Ooh,
I think he's going to be awesome. I'm a Syracuse guy. I'm from Syracuse. I've seen him play in person. I think he's going to test really well. Good overall athlete. I've been surprised he's fallen a little bit based on where he was early in his career, but I'm super interested to see how he tests.
Me, it's Roschon Johnson.
Sure.
Because if Roschon Johnson, it's going to be fascinating if and when he's just a better athlete than Bijan Robinson. And now we've got one guy who's the Longhorn with the athleticism, and the other Longhorn has all the production and has the savant-like running skills and instincts. It's going to be an interesting dichotomy to have these two guys, to have a Ronnie Brown, Cadillac Williams situation playing out. It didn't play out with their opportunities being balanced like you saw at Auburn with those two guys, but we could see it where you have two competing prospect profiles that are both incredibly interesting. And that's the thing that Roschon needs, right? If he can't get the production because he was on the team with Bijan Robinson, the ripcord he would pull is, well, that's fine. Watch me run. Watch me jump, motherfuckers.
Yeah, I'm with you. It'll be interesting. And I think he's a name that's probably undervalued because of who his competition was. Right. I definitely am with you on that.
We have him as a top 5 running back.
So that's it'll be interesting to see how they test. Like this, the narratives coming out of this combine are going to be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, would you rather have Tank Bigsby?
No, I don't think I would.
No. What are we talking about here, man? What are we talking about? Zach Charbonnet got convinced to go back to school. I don't know why. Right? But if you're young and you're 20 years old and you're potentially super fast with size and you're like a Kendre Miller, I'm going to be I'm intrigued. Right? I'm intrigued. Those are the type of guys that I want to see Kendre Miller test. I want to see Roschon test. And I do want to see Charbonnet test because I want him to prove me wrong. I want him to prove me wrong. It's hard for me to believe that a guy that productive, that's also an incredible athlete, didn't come out last year. So my natural instinct is to believe, oh, wait, maybe he's not that fast. And then that's another conversation. Now we have to run this through the prism. Like, okay, this guy caught 30-plus passes. He has size. That by itself is great. But if he runs a 4.65, where are we? What is he? Right? We'll run comps on him and we'll figure it out. But then it becomes a conversation. Not many people have Roschon Johnson ahead of Zach Charbonnet.
No, and that's not something that we're seeing in the market either, right? You look at some of the, we're talking about the consensus, some of the consensus big boards. Charbonnet is at 63. Roschon Johnson's at 121 over at NFL Mock Draft Database. So, and again, then Roschon Johnson's like running back, like call it between 10 and 15, and Charbonnet is like 5. I think 5, 4 or 5. So yeah, I mean, this is that's definitely a split. But again, like I think it's interesting because you look at, all right, one of the conversations we had earlier is you had receivers who were overvalued, right? Or there's a run on receivers, right? Well, if you need playmakers, right? And maybe this was a little bit of why James Cook went higher last year, right? Like if you look at some teams where you're like, all right, it's going to be really expensive to draft wide receivers. There's a glut of them. How do we go differently? Maybe it's pass catching receiver. Maybe it's pass catching running backs, right? Maybe we see some of these guys go up into the later day 2 range because there's a shortage of offensive skill position players. Similar to the way that like Eckler isn't really Eckler is a running back. He's paid as a running back, right? He lines up as a running back, but he is really he was their best receiving option at periods of time, right? Like he has far surpassed his contract value because of his ability as a pass catcher. I think that is that is something that we might see some of these other guys be vaulted up on this year. And honestly, if we get some guys going in the late second round of rookie drafts, like that is historically a really good spot to be in, drafting, late day 2 guys in round 2 of rookie drafts. Like that's a really lucrative spot to be drafting.
I mean, if you were just betting on a guy making a leap in a mock draft index, with the mock draft index on Player Profiler as well, you're just betting on a guy making a leap. Roschon Johnson shredding the combine, that's an instant 40 spots. Boom, just like that, right? And then Zach Charbonnet face planning, that's an instant 40 spot drop.
Yes.
Right? Whereas a guy like Devin A-Chain, is it Devon or Devin?
Not sure. Haven't gotten that far in the studies yet.
It's either Devon or Devin. We should figure that out in the chat. Chat, help me out. Devon or Devin. I feel bad already. I feel you can tell I'm like, I don't know. That's the guy you're talking about. Great case to be made for the 3rd running back drafted overall. Even though for us, that's the James Cook corollary. Like for us in fantasy, we're like 180 pounds, 185 pounds, 190. I can't do it. But the NFL is like, this is what's valuable to us. Eat it, fantasy people.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's funny. I saw some ADP that was from February of last year, and you start looking at some of the names up there, and you're like, well, that's not how it turned out. It was like Malik Willis at 2, Spiller at 4, Corral at 6, right? Sam Howell at 9, right? Like you start looking at, you're like, what world are we living in, right? Like I think a lot of this stuff is going to change, right? You look at, there's a lot of stuff that, you know, we spend this whole time thinking we know a lot of, and one of the truest things in Dynasty is you end up being surprised on draft day about where certain guys go. Like, and it's usually like a handful plus that honestly really changes the way we value rookie classes. Right. The difference between 3 or 4 guys is a big difference in terms of, where there's 20 guys that have, real Dynasty difference making potential, right? The difference between 3 and 4 of them, that's a huge difference. So I think that's why the draft becomes so important, but also why draft pedigree is the key thing.
Devon. It's Devon.
Devon.
Jojo Sanchez in the chat. Devon. Thank you, Jojo.
Devon.
Yeah, that's what it is. That's what it is. So this is how we approach things. We try to be super conservative with a lot of these guys, like I talked about. Guys coming off a major knee injury, we're not going to vault him. Okay, we're going to wait on these rookies and see how they test and see where they get drafted. That sounds crazy, but it's conservative. However, it's like super conservative, and then once in a while, you see a curveball. Once in a while, you see something that goes off the board. That's how we are. But these are strategic, targeted takes, right? You're not going to see a lot of takes in our Dynasty rankings, right? But it certainly, to have Roschon Johnson where we do, feels like a take, but we just have a lot of information about him. We were at the Senior Bowl. We talked to a lot of people from Texas, right? And scouts and et cetera. And there is a market inefficiency with Roschon Johnson. That's where that comes from. We're going to pick our spots. We have a handful of guys, in any given time, where you can tell when you go to our Dynasty rankings, they're picking a spot here. They picked a spot here. They picked a spot here. There's not many hot takes, but we like to know things and feel confident when we're going to step out off the ledge on a particular player. That's my general approach to things. I don't want anyone to think that, there's a lot of crazy rankings over there at Player Profiler. Nah. But there's going to be a couple that are going to be either backwards from what everyone else is doing, or a couple that are out there into outer space. And then our response is always, just wait. It's cool. Dude, you don't have to agree. It's fine. You don't okay, just wait. We'll just wait. It's fine. We got time. We get the combine. We get the draft. It's cool.
Yeah.
You like that approach?
I mean, listen, I find it funny, like when things become really consensus, because then you go back to, again, people ask them about George Pickens thing at me, right? Because I think that's like a great example of why I think Dynasty can be really funny, because people just begin to believe things, right? And maybe it's the way it makes them feel or whatever, that just become devoid of reality at a given point. And I think that, like, when that happens, like those moments where you can be really like contrarian, I think can make a big difference.
Bingo. I like Quentin Johnston. I think that he has a chance to seize the wide receiver 1 spot. There are very few other wide receivers that have that potential, but I think we could come out of the combine where Jackson Smith-Njigba disappoints, and then like we talked about with Charbonnet versus Johnson, we could have Johnston versus Smith-Njigba, where Smith-Njigba disappoints, but it's not like he's going to go anywhere, right? It's not like he's going to fall that far, but Johnston could come up and seize it. That could happen.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And, he more profiles, I think, what people are looking for physically too, right? I think that's an edge that he has. But I keep going back to like Smith and Jigba. Like, what do we want, right? I think we get really. I think we can really sort of wrap ourselves in a pretzel sometimes, thinking about like, well, he was injured at the end of his career. Like, what do we know that's like consistently the most important predictor of fantasy success at the wide receiver position? Did you do it early? Right. And he did it early. And the wide receivers that he kept at bay and like good wide receivers that he forced to transfer that ended up going in like the top 20 of the draft last year, Jameson Williams, other guys that he played ahead of early on in his career and was awesome, right? Hung and was better in certain metrics than Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, right? Like, what do we know that's consistently true, right? If you do it early, you have a better chance at wide receiver. And I think any time that he's not being up at the top of the position, given his track record, I think that's a value situation. So if he's wide receiver 3-4, I mean, that is a smashing opportunity, given what we know that's the most important thing at the wide receiver position.
I'm looking at our current lifetime value ratings for these guys. I don't see a path for Quentin Johnston to surpass Jackson Smith and Jigba post-combine. I don't see the path. But I'm telling you right now, it's very possible that that's what happens, that the mock drafts vault this guy like crazy, and then here come the fantasy guys, here come the dynasty guys trailing along behind the mock drafters, yipping at the heels of Johnston, and the next thing you know, it's a big conversation.
Yeah, and I hope that causes Smith and Jigba to fall in rookie drafts, because that's, and one of the things that people will ask me a lot is, I don't put a ton of value in receivers in rookie drafts, and one of the reasons why is because I think you can largely get the guys at a lot bigger discounts, right, that are veterans, right? I lean that way at the position. However, when you get the chance to take wide receiver 3 or 4 in a class that's excellent, like, you do that, right? Like, you just my goal isn't to draft wide receiver 1 or 2 in a class, it's to draft wide receiver 3 or 4 that looks a lot like 1 or 2. Right? And I think that he is going to be one of those guys that could potentially do that this year.
Justin Jefferson at the 111 in Superflex. That was a thing that was in every rookie draft that was available.
Yeah. I traded Judy for the Jefferson pick plus a second in multiple spots. And it's one of those things where you're like, okay, these profiles are very similar. The market's treating them differently. They're very similar. Take the cheaper one plus. And I said, it was an easy, right? That's Dynasty made easy.
I think the best place based on the opportunity cost to go wide receiver, and I believe it's in this book here, the Dynasty
Dominator. a fellow author, a fellow traveler along the authorship path.
Tell me if you agree with this. Pick 10 to 20. I like pick 10 to 20 for wide receivers. After pick 20, it gets a little tricky, right? But that's the T. Higgins, Justin Jefferson, Brandon Ayuk. There's so many in that zone where you're also not foregoing a foundational running back, like a can't miss running back either. So you're not foregoing a can't miss running back, but you're also not getting into a place where you're taking like a 3rd round wide receiver who could be Danny Gray either. Like you're really in a sweet spot there. Pick 10 to 20.
You want late first round guys or first round NFL draft pedigree guys that fall, or elite production guys, elite profiles that fall to the 2nd round. That's what you want to take in that sort of 10 to 20 range. You got to be careful not to take 4 or 5 of them, right? You have to be careful on not. Those are the guys that when you keep adding them up, they become a drag on your roster. So you have to be careful, because still the hit rate on guys like even a good wide receiver in the 2nd round, you're still looking at a hit rate somewhere like around 40% really at best.
Right? Oh, it's sub 50%. Oh, it's sub 50% for sure. Yeah, we've all lived through the Corey Colemans. I mean, we've seen some things, dude. We've seen some things, and with Quentin Johnston, the reason I say that is because the best example is that I've lived through Kevin White being a top 10 pick in the draft, right? Quentin Johnston's way better than him. But I'm just saying I lived through it. And if there's a Kevin White athleticism score posted by Quentin Johnston, just everybody buckle up, everybody look out. This is what's happening. Just making sure everybody knows. Is there a particular wide receiver that you think is going to be in that sweet spot this year for you?
Again, with the caveat that I haven't done a ton of research yet, I was just looking at some stuff sort of just so I was prepared for the question. Marvin Mims was interesting. I don't know how he's going to test or anything like that, but when you look, like he had a north of 4 yards per route run season, 33% target. He was targeted on three. Let me try that again. Targeted on 33% of his routes as well. Again, that was an elite type season, and broke out to a 20% dominated rating at 18. Never got a huge breakout, but those numbers are decent looking. That I'm interested in. Where he ends up falling. He's a name that I'm certainly going to monitor.
Cool, love it. Now, what about any deep sleepers in rookie draft? Any names from like small schools at running back or receiver that you've heard? Maybe not work you've done, but you've heard in the wind. You've heard, oh, this is a name.
Yeah, I like guys that can play size wise and basically do everything. So, and maybe they're not elite, but they give you a lot of outs. So, for example, like I think Evan Hall is interesting because I think he's going to fall to day 3. I think he's in terms of his receiving stuff, it looks, in yards per route run, targets per route run, those sorts of metrics. He's in the top 20 percentile. Those are interesting sort of from that range. Again, what I'm trying to accomplish is size enough to fill in as a running back and enough to catch, so that way you can make yourself fantasy viable. And again, I'm more trying to accomplish with those type of guys, 1 or 2 to 3 spot starts, right, at different times, right? I'm more looking at spot start opportunities for those guys than I necessarily am, thinking that they're going to be, the next, the next Kenneth Walker or something like that. That's not a realistic expectation from that range. What you're hoping for is to get a situation like Ramondre Stevenson, right, where he's a big guy that can move and can play both sides and things coalesce and everything goes awesome. Like that's an outstanding case from day 3. Those are the types of profiles you want to look for.
I talked to Evan Hall at the Senior Bowl. Phenomenal dude. What a great guy. I mean, I really like, because, what I would do is there was a media breakfast and people were just sort of mingling around on the perimeter. And I went right up to their tables, sometimes while they're eating, and I just stuck this microphone in their face, and some of them were cool about it. And I was like, well, this is the one day we have. So I don't know if you guys can get the memo, but this is how it works.
Right.
So if this is off-putting to you, then you're in trouble when you get into the league. So this is a scrum, is what they call it. Evan, super cool about it. So actually, I'll play in the outtakes of the podcast. We're gonna put the interview, my quick conversation I had with Evan Hall from the Senior Bowl, put that in the outtakes. That'll be fun.
Cool.
Now, final question of the top 10. There may be bonus questions. Give us a wide receiver that you're targeting in trade, one of these guys that is now available at a discount because so many of these wide receivers that don't quite reach their full potential or capture the imagination of dynasty leaguers, they become available at a discount. These are the wide receivers you're vacuuming up. You love trading for veteran wide receivers, as do I. Is there a guy you think that is currently outside the top 25 that could make a real big push this year that you're targeting?
Deontay Johnson.
Johnson. Oh, that's also, I love that that's also a dig. And Deontay Johnson is incredible at the dig route, by the way. It's also a dig at George Pickens. That is a target conservation slight of George Pickens. That is well done, my friend.
Well, I appreciate that. It actually, I started looking at these guys and was yes, just was like, why are they trading so differently? As I was sort of going through some of the George Pickens stuff, and it's like you look at Deontay Johnson's production, it's pretty remarkable. I mean, I steal a PFF metric. I derive a metric basically from a PFF thing, which is expected points, and I just divide it by expected routes run. He looks a lot like Waddle. He looks a lot like AJ Brown last year. The problem is everything went poorly for Deontay Johnson, and everything went awesome for those guys. But you put him right in the expectation of guys that can sort of fall out of bed, get 140 targets, and produce like guys that are and have expectations that are similar to guys that are way better, way better values than he is. I think that's a really interesting one. The other thing too is like you look at guys, he has the most catches of anyone in the history of the NFL without a touchdown, right? When you look at guys above 20 red zone targets, he is the only one without a touchdown, right? There's like, I think 37 of, or I think all but three of them. I think there was 40 guys with more than 20 targets down there, and it was like 37 of them had at least 3 touchdowns. Like, it's a remarkably bad variance outcome for him last year. It's kind of the approach that I would take to him. And if you're going to get that level of 9+ target potential and it's a per game basis, I mean, that's volume's the lifeblood of receiver production. And if you're going to get it at a discount, like I think he can perform. I don't think he neatly fits in a box, which is interesting, but I sort of put him in with some guys that are a lot higher price guys, just because I think, like, wrote an article at Football Guys talking about how I thought he was a good arbitrage on CD Lamb. Like, and there was a CD Lamb for him type of trade. There were some other pieces involved, obviously, but when you looked at them, like, I don't think it's a necessarily a bad bet to take Deontay Johnson to score more points than CD Lamb this upcoming year. I'd take it at plus money, obviously, but I think he could outscore him.
Whoa.
He had the 6 most targets in the league last year. Deontay Johnson had the 6 most targets in the league last year.
Well, he had the most targets in the league the year before.
Yeah. It's the volumes of like, if he looked like DK Metcalf, like, we'd be having a totally different conversation. But the fact that he doesn't look that way, and I think that he hasn't gotten the benefit of a guy like I don't know, Ben Roethlisberger in his prime. Instead, he got Ben Roethlisberger on the decline. It's all the sort of efficiency stuff has been it's been blowing in his face, and he's still overperformed it. So it wouldn't shock me to see him be a top 5 target guy next year. That's just what he rolls out of bed and does.
He should be a top 25 wide receiver in Dynasty. He should be. He's not, but he should be. I agree with you. I agree with that. What about someone who's a little bit down the board? A value down the board. We talked about Chase Claypool. We're talking about guys that, had just some of the work. Talk about an unlucky bad season. Hunter Renfrow. Hunter Renfrow at one point was a productive asset that people were starting every week. We've got Michael Gallup. We talked about Tyler Boyd earlier. Anyone in that zone, that sort of category that you're trying to go after to fill out your roster?
If you like George Pickens, take Alec Pierce at wide receiver 50 instead of George Pickens at wide receiver like 25. They look a lot alike.
The other one that I would Pierce.
Say, right. Yeah, they went right next to each other in the draft. It's like the idea that Pickens is that much better than Pierce is interesting to me. The other thing that I would say is I actually like Romeo Doubs. The way that he produced this year, again, expecting him to come in and be a wide receiver 1 is absolutely like not fair to the guy. However, when you look at his production this past year, it's actually above the average threshold for round 4 wide receivers. And so what did he do? Basically, the expectations were totally unreasonable, and then he doesn't meet them because it's like not a reasonable expectation for him to meet them as a rookie from day 3. But he comes in and actually performs his yards per route run metrics are above what the average is historically for rookie wide receivers. I had him at 1.36. It's about 1.26 for round 4 wide receivers historically. So you're already like, all right, he's ahead of pace, right? He's ahead of where he probably should be, but has fallen substantially in price. And I think when that happens, I'm interested. There's a depth chart opening in front of him. He's probably being held down by the fact that Aaron Rodgers is not going to be his quarterback, would be my guess. But all those things adding up, like I think him trying to hit from deep there, I think is interesting, and has some name value that can potentially bounce back for him this year.
I like Wan'Dale Robinson to bounce back. Wan'Dale Robinson didn't produce, right? Didn't produce, except that one game where he actually did get a 70% snap share. He had that one game where he ran 30 routes. And in that one game, do you have any idea how many targets he had in that game? The game where like he worked his way, finally healthy, and then, because he was getting acclimated to the offense after missing a bunch of time and training camp and early in the season. Finally, they ramped him up slowly, and that final game before he went out for the year, how many targets do you remember?
I thought it was double digits. I could be wrong on that.
13.
Yeah.
13, Jordan.
Yeah.
So the guy had 13 targets, and he was a wide receiver 3 in 2 other weeks, right? He only had 3 total weeks in the year with a 70+% snap share, and only 4 with a snap share over 25%. So if you just throw one of those weeks out, right, as just an unlucky wide receiver variance week like they all have, suddenly this guy is putting up 15 fantasy points a game in the games where he's actually getting any kind of usage. And the Breakout Finder algorithm, we have a Breakout Finder app, and it looks at crunches all the college data. By far and away, the most surprising breakout rating was Wan'Dale Robinson's. I was shocked. These models are challenged by the fact that this guy was 5'8", 180. Mm-hmm. So there's not a lot of great comps for him, and gives guys like that the benefit of the doubt where they don't always deserve it. And so you got to take some of those breakout ratings, with just a slight more uncertainty than a guy that's coming in at 6'1", 210. Right? They're just it's harder for a program to model a Wan'Dale Robinson, a lot harder than it is for like a Roddy White, for example. But one of the most impressive college seasons we've seen in recent years, just in terms of raw opportunity and production and commanding targets, early breakout age, and all these things we love so much. And just a washout season, but showed flashes. And yet he's now considered in the same category as Kadarius Toney. He is so much better as a football player than Kadarius Toney. Get out of here. Get out of here. Kadarius Toney was the easiest fade. We're talking about early second round. He was the easiest avoid we've seen in the last 5 years of first-round picks to just sidestep. Okay, normally I'm going to go first-round pick here. He's the last one on the board. That's okay. I'm going to go second-round pick here. That's okay. No Kadarius Toney for me. Wan'Dale Robinson, he was picked at the 211. He was also picked ahead of George Pickens and before Sky Moore and before Alec Pierce and all those guys. So that's my candidate, just because I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. And talk about wide open depth chart. There's no way the Giants could possibly sign or draft enough receivers to give him the competition for next year that would in any way suppress him. What are they going to do? Oh, we're gonna extend Isaiah Hodgins. Ooh, okay. What else?
I heard Kenny Galladay's available.
Kenny Galladay's been released. It's over, man. It is over. It is over. Okay, bonus question. I'll get you out of here. I need your truther, guy that you're stashing still, though you're not getting much from him and you don't care. Maybe get him thrown into some deals where you don't have him. Who's that guy?
Alexander Madison. I think he's got a chance to land whether it's a 1B job, something like that, or a good injury away job. There's a non-zero chance he could be a starter for Minnesota, depending on how this happens, but he'll be a free agent. I think that there is a decent chance that he has an uptick, at least an opportunity this upcoming year.
That is the show. Hey, you like that video? Be sure to subscribe and activate those alerts so you get notified as soon as new videos drop. And be sure to check out PlayerProfiler.com. We have all the tools for you to dominate every type of fantasy league. We have a draft kit, Dynasty Deluxe, data analysis, DFS Dominator, and don't forget the player rankings to rule them all.